Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, the Gus Bus runs out of gas right before UCF can upset Iowa State.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gittins, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every single day. Joining me, as he does always, is my guy, Andrew Gluco from the First Word on Sports, or the Last Word on Sports, first and last. He's doing his thing over there. Andrew, the Gus Bus was primed for the upset. I predicted the upset. You did not. But one thing we did predict was a big day on the ground from RJ Harvey and the UCF running game. It was a big day for RJ. He had a ton of yards, man. RJ went crazy for 196 yards on 25 carries and 2 TDs, mostly in the first half.
Yeah, this whole game was a tale of two halves. First half, UCF's run game was just on fire. RJ Harvey opened it up with a big run early. UCF did what they have not been able to do for the last handful of games: score early. And Gus Malzahn last week flat out said, "Look, we got to find ways to score early and set the pace." Well, they did. They did just that. They were doing pretty much everything they needed to do in the first half, and then the wheels fell off. The blocking by the offensive line tanked as a result. The running game completely cratered. The pass game struggled to begin with against the number 5 pass defense in the country, and the second half was only that much worse. And then the defense. The defense had a pick six, nearly had a second pick six, with a little asterisk next to it. Just look online. It's going to be everywhere.
Sticking with the running game here, Andrew, we noted on Friday, you and I talked about if they could meet their averages. They were averaging about 268 yards per game on the ground before we started recording. You talked about how a lot of that was front loaded on the front part of that schedule. So there was some doubt about whether they could do that against Iowa State in this one. 354 yards total. Now, it wasn't just the RJ Harvey show. Jacurri Brown got in the mix. He had 154 yards rushing as well.
Yeah, and in fact, he had the last big run of the game in the first drive of the second half. He had a 67-yard touchdown run up the middle where he just hit the Jets and no one was catching up to him.
Yeah.
After that run is when everything just fell apart. But look, Jacurri Brown, obviously this is his first start at UCF. He had 3 starts at Miami previously, but with the limited time, limited number of reads in his progression, and he's probably told, hey, if the first 2 to 2.5 reads in your progression aren't panning out, take the ball and run. And he has a very keen eye for being on the field, and his spatial awareness is fantastic.
It's great.
That was fun to watch. Even though he got to the point where he couldn't hit the side of a bus if he tried. No pun intended.
Side of a Gus bus.
But from a running standpoint, he made very smart decisions. He was very shifty, and he was very aware of where defenders were around him, and he was able to make things happen.
I liked the plan. I liked the plan to use his legs, and the combination of him and RJ as a threat really threw Iowa State off in that first half. And we talked about run blocking and offensive line and how, the problems that they had on offensive line. We'll get into that later, but it worked for them in the first half. In the first half, they were running the ball at will.
They did, and it seemed like everything was working. The run blocking was able to, while not push back the defensive line, they were able to at least shift them over and open holes up. And on the left side of the line, which was UCF's stronger side, that's where RJ Harvey had that 80-yard run to start. First play of a drive, boom, gone, touchdown. Ran to the left side, and there was no coming back. Jacurri Brown's run was up the middle. But even though UCF's right side is, particularly the weak side, they were able to do just enough to make things happen. And then in the second half, they couldn't make anything happen.
Yeah.
Plays for loss. RJ Harvey, 9 carries, 18 yards in the second half. When I'm writing my notes for the game, because as I'm doing it, I had marked that he was going to hit 200. I mean, come on, you're almost all the way there. And he never did. And I was like, well, delete.
We had questions about Jacurri throwing the ball. But again, the game plan seemed to be to manage him, keep the ball on the ground, try to play ball control. Again, they were able to do that in the first half. The second half, again, this game was the tale of two halves for both teams. And UCF ended up coming up short in this one. But Jacurri Brown, absolutely a bright spot here, I think, on the ground. Now, do they stick with that moving forward? I think that's going to be a question that we're going to have. Like, how do you start to let him get loose with his arm, or do you again keep the ball on the ground and play ball control here in games coming? What do you take away from the UCF running game after this one?
Well, as I said before, UCF was a run first and run second team, and it showed. The passing game was so unreliable, and I think the worst part was it didn't have to be this way. Jacurri Brown on multiple occasions aired the ball deep and never got anything for it. Every deep pass he threw was incomplete. And she got to the point, it's like, why are you doing this? You're in the second half at a certain point, and you're trying to milk the clock down. Why are you giving them basically free clock stoppage with deep passes that you really shouldn't be throwing? That's where it really got. I was scratching my head. I wasn't sure. Is this Gus's plan? Is this, throwing to the decoy guy, running down the field instead of looking at your shorter reads? I'm not sure, but you throw for 40%. Now, granted, Iowa State, as we've talked about,
the adjusted was only 47%, by the way. So it wasn't like there were a bunch of drops. There was one drop today.
Yeah, it was still when you adjust for sure, but it was still pretty bad.
Yeah, 40. Yeah. It was under 50. Yeah,
that's a bad. And I remember you said 60%. That's the baseline. When John Rice Plumlee was quarterback at UCF, and he had his moments where he was just on fire. There are certain times he couldn't hit anything, and I always said 60% is the key. If he can hit 60% of his passes, UCF's offense and the run game is designed. They should win the game.
Yeah.
If Jacurri Brown was able to hit 60% of his passes, they would have won this game easily.
Yeah, I think that when you look at trying to upset a team like Iowa State in the Big 12, the big play matters. Hitting the big plays matter through the air, especially once it turns into a shootout. You've got to move the ball through the air. Jacurri Brown 0 of 7 on passes of 20 or more yards in this one.
Yeah, and the team was 0 of 4 on third down in the second half. I mean, they could not convert and extend drives. I mean, the craziest stat is time of possession the second half. Iowa State out-possessed UCF 22 minutes, 30 seconds to 7 minutes and 30 seconds. I mean, that's insane at how much they controlled the second half. And it's because UCF kept having 3 and outs. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't throw the ball. So it was just 3 and out punt, 3 and out punt, 3 and out punt. Second half possessions. Punt, touchdown with an asterisk, punt, interception. And that asterisk is, and again, all you got to do is Google it. Should have been a 71-yard pick six, but the ball only made it 70 yards.
Well, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Again, it was a good day on the ground for UCF. Anytime you rush for over 300 yards, you're going to have a chance to win ball games. That's what we predicted. You were right about the score at the end. I wasn't. We'll get to that. But on the other side, there was a quarterback in Rocco Becht, who we talked about on Friday as well, and how UCF limiting him would be the key to the game. So we're going to get into that right after a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic is the world's first generationally engineered probiotic, Andrew. Now, what does that mean? It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle the rough mornings after a night out of drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break down the byproduct. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel great in the morning. So if you're going out drinking after, if UCF depressed you so much that you went out and drank after that game, drink Z-Biotics first. So here's how to use it. Step 1, drink Z-Biotics pre-alcohol drink. Step 2, drink responsibly. And step 3, enjoy your next morning free of a hangover. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/locked and use code LockedOnCollege to get 15% at checkout. Andrew, coming back in here, Rocco Becht had a rough first half. The UCF defense gave him all he could handle, almost all he could handle, without letting go. They pulled who was it? Was it Deshaun Jackson, which famously dropped like a punt return before crossing the goal line? And I think that move got named after him. Auburn almost had a player do that this year. We've seen it around college football. Look. UCF had a pick six in this one, maybe should have had 2 pick sixes, but certainly they gave Rocco Becht problems in this game.
Oh, absolutely. First half, 6 of 16, 48 yards and a pick. And of course that interception went all the way for a touchdown. Mm-hmm. That was the good pick. He was rushed. They were making his life miserable. They had a sack. They were doing everything they were supposed to be doing. Second half, a little bit of injury kicks in. Nigel Kelly got hurt. That certainly hurt on the pass rush. UCF did record 2 more sacks, but 14 of 31, still under 50%, I might add.
Yeah.
But 226 yards, when the game started picking up in the second half, Jaylin Noel just was absolutely unstoppable. UCF had no answer for this guy in the second half. It was just unbelievable. He had 1 catch for 14 yards in the first half and finished with, 8 catches for 153?
Yeah.
He went off. And while he himself had a couple of drops and never made it into the end zone himself, he certainly set up the Cyclones to score, more, some serious pointage by other players, and that helped them make that amazing comeback at the end of the game.
Yeah, it was interesting watching this one, the dichotomy of 2 halves. Again, we talked about the UCF running game in the first half versus the fall off in the second half, and then there was the Iowa State passing game in the first half versus the explosion in the second half. Rocco Becht to Jaylin Noel was prolific in the second half of this one. So just noting again for our listeners, Jacurri Brown didn't hit a single pass of over 20 yards in this game, but Rocco Becht found Jaylin Noel beyond 20 yards a few times in the second half. So he only connected on 3 of it looked like 9 passes that he made down the field, but they were huge plays that kept Iowa State in this game.
Mm-hmm. The crazy part is, it only takes 1 or 2 plays to change the trajectory of the game. And here's the thing, you're the number 9 team in the country. You're undefeated. You're playing at home. Momentum is not UCF's friend. So Iowa State, all they had to do was stop the bleeding a little bit, make a couple of key stops and a couple big plays, bring the crowd back into the game. And then, that makes it that much harder for the road team, especially a team that's been in disarray, for the last 3 games prior. UCF, 3-game losing streak coming into this game at 3-3. So to knock them off course was a lot easier than it would be if they were 5-1 or 6-0 or even 4-2. The confidence would be there. They'd be a little more assured of themselves and feeling better with some better results out there. But because they were reeling after some very bad games, it was much easier for Iowa State to recapture that momentum. And it, again, as I said in the second half, take away that 1 yard touchdown, which was the direct result of that not pick six, where the ball was dropped at the 1 and bounced in the end zone, stayed in bounds, and no one picked up the ball. I mean, I don't really, even though the stat sheet says that's an offensive drive and an RJ Harvey touchdown, I really don't count it for the perspective of how did UCF's second half go? Because it was a 1 play, 1 yard drive. So you take that out, punt, interception.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Now, look, they got after Rocco Becht in this one. He was under pressure on 34% of his dropbacks. For reference to our listeners, that's a good pressure rate for the UCF defense. But we also noted the poor 42% completion percentage. His adjusted was actually 60%. Jaylin Noel, as good a day as he had, he was credited with 3 drops in this one. Yeah, which was pretty crazy.
He had a rough, and especially the earlier part of the game, I had a rough time really getting settled down. But once he got into a groove, I see the smart thing, and Colorado did it, Florida did it, and Cincinnati did it, is play the shorter game. And that's what they started doing a lot more. And eventually it opened up the deep thirds, but they were playing, a lot shorter. And UCF's pass defense just cannot handle the shorter third of the field. They just got carved up. Everyone's taking note of what Shedeur Sanders did to them, and it was Thanksgiving, and UCF's pass defense was a turkey, and it worked. It's funny. You look at the halftime stats, and Brown and Becht almost were identical in passing yards, that low, and then you look at the final stats, and you're like, really?
Yeah. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough to see for UCF. Felt like they had this one. It felt like the big plays were coming in and they were doing what they needed to do on Rocco Becht. And then second half, defense just gave up way too much for UCF to win this game. Ultimately, good teams find ways to win and bad teams find ways to lose. I'm not sure this is a bad team. But certainly they've got to figure out how to find ways to win at ends of these conference games.
Yeah, and they got to figure it out quick because, they played undefeated Iowa State on the road. Well, guess what? They're playing undefeated BYU at home this Saturday. So they've got their hands full with another legit team that is going to push them hard. So fans have sharpened their pitchforks and they're lit their torches and they're not happy. Oh, I'm not coming to the game. Well, if UCF is going to have a chance, they need that home field advantage. Iowa State got that home field advantage from the Cyclone crowd at Jacurri Stadium. They were loud. They really got into it. UCF's got to find a way to get the crowd into it. They got to strike early, and they got to reestablish the run. They got to get RJ Harvey out there. He's a fan favorite, and when he makes a big play, the crowd responds. So if they can find a way to do that, to not get stood up at the line and blown up, which is a very recurring theme this year, especially on the right side of the field of the offensive line, maybe they have a chance to do something. I said before, if they can keep the game, 21 points by Iowa State, they can win this. Well, they could have if they gave up 21 points. Yeah. That's how much the offense scored. Now, obviously, we can't take into account, pick sixes when we're making projections, but 3 touchdowns would have been enough in this one.
Yeah.
But the defense gave up 38 points. Iowa State's a very good team. They're going to have to find a way to keep points off the board against BYU, or else it's going to be more of the same, another L.
Yeah, you're not going to win a lot of games if you can't score 3 offensive touchdowns in today's college football. So despite the defense chipping in as much as they did there, UCF came up short. Now, a lot of whether they can do that is going to be predicated on whether they decide to stick with Jacurri Brown and what he can do with his arm. So we're going to talk about what UCF needs to see from him right after this word from our sponsors. Today's episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, Andrew. Do you ever need tickets to a game, Andrew?
Oh, man. Before the roof got blown up, I loved going to Tampa Bay Rays games.
I actually just went to a Rays game not too long ago, weirdly. But look, Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite team play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals and great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They also have all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows you the total up front, so you don't have any surprise fees at checkout. You can get panoramic seat views to see where you're sitting, and you get a low price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On College for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. What time is it? Game time. Jacurri Brown, did he do enough to secure the job for next week? Did you see what you needed to see if you're Gus Malzahn from Jacurri Brown Day? He is your guy. Obviously struggled with his arm. On the ground, he was dynamic. Can UCF recreate that? I think they can.
Well, I mean, the next question is, who else would they play?
Is EJ Colson out of the question already?
Well, I mean, EJ Colson, when he played last week against Cincinnati, the prior game, he looked like a true freshman. I mean, his passes were even less accurate than Jacurri Brown's. So he looked the role of a true freshman. Now, playing at home helps, and he did that against Cincinnati. But this isn't Cincinnati. This is BYU, who's undefeated this year. And it's far enough in the season that you can say, okay, they're legit. In fact, they had their own wild game, this week too, just like Iowa State UCF. So, they're coming off their own, adrenaline rush game. But as you know, when you get that season keeps going on and on, and you get all those wins, the weight gets heavier and heavier, and the chance of something going wrong gets higher and higher. Yeah. In the case of UCF, they got Jacurri Brown. Yeah, you got EJ Colson. Do you bring back KJ Jefferson? Do you look at like a Dylan Risk, who's buried in the depth chart? I don't think UCF really has any other choice but to continue to go with Jacurri Brown. I don't think Colson's ready for this level of game, and at this point, all faith in Jefferson has been lost. So at this point, it's Browns to lose.
Yeah, I agree. I think they stick with Jacurri Brown at this point. Find some version of this offense that you can execute. Last week, we talked about Kobe Hudson and his impact. He was a non-factor in this game because the passing game was a non-factor. You got to find a way to get those skill positions at the wide receiver slots. You've got to get them involved in the game, and you got to find some balance, because one-dimensional football doesn't win football games against better teams in this league.
Yeah, I mean, Army was blushing at the stat sheet. 62 yards. Yes, sign me up. This is a throwback to the 1930s. 3 yards in a cloud of and a cloud of dust. Run. My old high school was a running team. We always said it was run, pass, punt. So that's UCS bread and butter. Okay, you can make that work, but you have to be able to do it for a full game, not just one half. You can't take the foot off the gas. You got to put that. You got to press on their throat, and you got to finish the job. And I was a student at UCF in the early 2000s, and we had a saying of UCFing the game, where they would find a way to, snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Being from Cleveland, I know it's an art.
Yeah.
No one but Cleveland knows how to find ways to lose and make it look like a beautifully tragic. So that was UCF's story for when they first started FBS all the way into the mid 2000s, where they would always be just short of the big one, the big win. Nebraska in the 90s when Dante Culpepper was a quarterback at UCF, they're beating Nebraska at halftime. Nebraska, who won the national title that year. In fact, the Nebraska fans gave them a standing ovation because of how impressed they were. They couldn't finish the job. They lost the game. They're playing Georgia. They lose on a phantom offensive pass interference, lose by 1. They're playing Auburn in 98. They're winning 6-3. All they have to do is run out the clock, and they fumble. Auburn scores. They lose 10-6, and it cost them their first bowl game.
Yeah.
They had to wait another 7 years to get their first bowl game. So, I mean, UCF, this is very them over their history of just finding ways to lose these big games. And this just is kind of like what's old is new. And they're going back to this, this is not the throwback I was hoping for. If you're going to go, bring back stuff from the past, I would think of something a little bit better than finding ways to lose games that you should have in the bag.
Yeah. It's tough. And look, the Fire Gus crowd is getting louder week by week. But we talked before we started recording. I don't think that's the right move here.
They don't have the money.
Paying buyouts is something that is not very stomachable at this point in the game. But certainly, Gus has got to figure out a way to get this turned around and end the season on a positive note. Find your way to a bowl game. End the season with some momentum. Your season is not over. So you've got to get over this back half. They've got to get things going. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me, man. Before we get out of here, tell people where they can find your work.
You can catch me on Twitter /X at StatBoyDrew, as well as Last Word on College Sports, which is part of the Last Word in Sports family. Always a pleasure to be on with you, Mike.
Thank you. Listen, and thank you guys for making Locked On UCF your first listen today. For your second listen, check out our friends over at the Big 12 podcast. Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment. And Drake's doing a great job over there. He holds no punches when it comes to covering every team in the Big 12. Find Locked On Big 12 on UCF or wherever you listen to your podcast. Guys, we'll be back at you tomorrow with more Locked On UCF.